Brian Rolapp just dropped the biggest structural bombshell professional golf has seen in years, and it did not come from the USGA, it came from the man now running the PGA Tour. Within days of his competitive model reveal, golf's two governing powers found themselves staring at each other across a fight neither one fully controls. This is not a minor rules tweak. This is two different organizations with two different agendas, both trying to reshape the sport at the exact same time. Here is the part most fans are missing. Rolapp does not run the USGA. He runs the PGA Tour, but his announcement landed in the middle of the USGA and R&A's own unresolved fight over the golf ball rollback, a proposal that has been sitting on the table since 2023 and still has not been fully adopted. Two separate power centers, two separate timelines, and suddenly players are being asked to plan their careers around both at once. Let's start with what Rolapp actually announced. Ahead of the Travelers Championship in June 2026, Rolapp unveiled a new competitive model for the PGA Tour built around a two-track system. The top tier of players will compete in a smaller, more concentrated schedule of roughly 23 to 24 events. Everyone else gets pushed into a second tier. Rolapp called it a model grounded in meritocracy with clearer pathways and higher stakes when the best players compete together. The target implementation date is the 2028 season. That is the official language. Clean corporate, careful. But strip away the press release framing and the structural reality is blunt. Fewer full-time spots. A harder line between who is inside the top tier and who is fighting to get there. A system explicitly designed to concentrate the biggest names into fewer events, which also happens to concentrate television value into fewer events. Now layer the USGA fight on top of that. For years, the USGA and the R&A have pushed a proposal to roll back the golf ball for elite competition, a rule that would require top-level players to use a ball tested under modified launch conditions, cutting distance by an estimated 14 to 15 yards for the game's longest hitters. USGA CEO Mike Wan and R&A Chief Executive Martin Slumbers have both said the change would apply at their own championships and that the PGA Tour and the majors would have the option to adopt it as well. It would not touch recreational golfers at all. Just the elite game, that single word option is where this gets complicated. The USGA and R&A can set the rule for their own events. They cannot force the PGA Tour to adopt it. And Rolapp has made it clear he is not rushing to pick that fight. Asked directly about the rollback, his answer was carefully non-committal. He said the issue is complex, that it comes down to two separate questions: whether distance is actually a problem worth addressing, and whether the proposed rule change would even accomplish that. He said he has talked to players, to the governing bodies, to ball manufacturers, to fans, and that opinions are not remotely consistent. That is not an endorsement. That is a man declining to spend political capital on someone else's rule change while he is busy building his own. Read between the lines and the incentive problem becomes obvious. Most of the equipment manufacturers sponsoring PGA Tour players oppose the rollback. Rolapp is trying to modernize the tour's business, grow media rights value, and expand into bigger television markets. Publicly backing a rule that shrinks distance, annoys sponsors, and complicates his own product launch is exactly the kind of unforced error a media executive does not make in his first year on the job. So here is where the players get squeezed. If the USGA and R&A eventually push the rollback through for their own championships, majors like the US Open could be played under different equipment rules than a regular PGA Tour event. Meanwhile, the tour itself is separately compressing its own competitive structure, tightening the number of full status cards, and building a system where a bad stretch of form costs you your spot 2 years from now. Two different bodies, two different clocks, and players who have to prepare for both without knowing exactly how either one lands. This is why player reaction to Rolapp's reveal has been sharper than a normal schedule announcement. Wyndham Clark, fresh off a US Open win, called the two-track system a positive step, telling reporters the meritocracy angle would make the tour easier to follow. That is one read, but not every player at Rolapp's own press conference sounded that settled. When asked about the ball rollback specifically, the tone in the room was described as anything but unified, because the Future Competition Committee is still working through what a genuinely uncertain future looks like for players who do not know which rulebook they will be playing under 2 years from now, Rory. McIlroy's read on Rolapp himself has been measured rather than alarmed. When Rolapp was first named CEO, McIlroy called the move a really positive thing, pointing to his 2 decades of NFL experience as chief media and business officer. That was before the competitive model reveal. What matters now is whether that optimism survives contact with the actual mechanics: fewer full-time cards, a harder cut line, and a media rights strategy that treats desperation as a ratings driver rather than a problem to solve. Zoom out. And the real story is not the USGA panicking. It is 2 governing bodies moving on separate tracks, with the PGA Tour's new commissioner deliberately staying out of the ball rollback fight so he can finish building his own restructuring first. The USGA and R&A do not control the PGA Tour's schedule. The PGA Tour does not control what ball gets used at the US Open, and the players are the ones standing in the middle of both decisions, with no seat at either table that actually determines the outcome. The timeline makes this worse, not better. The Tour's new model targets 2028. The ball rollback's most recent update cycle stretches into 2026, with quarterly rules clarifications still being issued. That means players are being asked to commit to career decisions. What tier they will fight to stay in, what equipment they might eventually be required to use, based on 2 separate proposals that have not fully resolved and may never fully align. For the players ranked just outside the top tier, that uncertainty is not abstract. It is the difference between a guaranteed schedule and a fight for survival. Decided by rules, 2 different organizations are still negotiating without them in the room. There is a third pressure point most coverage skips entirely: the media rights calendar. Rolapp did not spend 20 years in the NFL's media and business office by accident. His entire competitive model reveal was timed around one goal: walking into the next television rights negotiation with a cleaner, more concentrated product to sell. Fewer full-status players, fewer diluted fields, a tighter top tier that broadcasters can market as must-watch instead of optional. That is not a guess. It is the same playbook every media executive uses when a league's rights deal is coming up for renewal. A meritocracy narrative sells well in a boardroom. It also happens to sell well on television. That is precisely why the USGA's timeline is so inconvenient for him right now. If the rollback gets adopted for majors while the Tour's own new model is still being finalized, broadcasters negotiating that next deal will be pricing in 2 different products. Majors played under one distance standard, regular Tour events played under another. Uncertainty is the one thing that drives rights fees down, not up. So Rolapp's public caution on the ball rollback is not indecision. It is a media executive protecting the value of the exact product he is trying to sell. Meanwhile, the players stuck outside the top tier are doing math nobody envies. If the new competitive model tightens the number of full cards, and a possible ball rollback simultaneously changes the equipment variables at the sport's biggest events, the players with the least leverage are absorbing risk from 2 directions they did not create and cannot resolve on their own. A veteran with a career built on distance off the tee has to wonder whether a future rollback erodes an advantage that took him a decade to build. At the same moment, the Tour itself is telling him his card is no longer guaranteed by past performance. None of this plays out in a vacuum. Equipment manufacturers, most of whom oppose the ball rollback, have deals tied directly to player performance numbers a distance rollback would quietly undercut. Broadcast partners are watching whether the 2-track model actually produces the drama Rolapp is promising, or just a smaller, more anxious player pool without the ratings lift to justify it. And the USGA is watching whether the Tour ever formally adopts its rule at all, because a rollback that only applies to the majors is a rollback that never touches the game most fans watch every week. That is the situation nobody wants to say plainly. The USGA cannot force the PGA Tour's hand. The Tour cannot override how the majors are played. And Rolapp, sitting at the center of both conversations, has every incentive to let that ambiguity sit exactly where it is until his own restructuring is locked in, the future competition. Committee keeps finalizing the 2-track model between now and 2028. The USGA and R&A keep running their own quarterly rules update cycle, still without full Tour buy-in on the rollback. Somewhere between those 2 clocks, players are supposed to plan the next 2 years of their careers without knowing which rulebook will actually govern the tournaments that decide whether they keep their card. The 2028 season will answer the PGA Tour side of this. The ball rollback timeline may answer the other. Until both land, professional golf is being built by 2 different rulebooks at once, and nobody currently playing the game gets a vote on either one. Which fight do you think resolves first? The Tour's new model or the USGA's rollback? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for straight breakdowns of where professional golf's power actually sits.